back like another conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. She is a Stanford educated attorney who previously practiced social security, disability, and medical malpractice law. No other than Ms. Ellen Lubensky.
Yes. I mean, my bar has never been in jeopardy. I clerked for Chief Justice Grabner of the New Jersey Supreme Court, and I freely admit that these are things I had no idea about. At 20, this apparently happens quite frequently. I was misdiagnosed with bipolar when really I'm autistic. I don't really care if I'm autistic. It's just a label. Or I had been physically disabled for 20 years by something called tardive dyskinesia, which is a side effect of antipsychotics. I hid in shame. I didn't speak my truth. These are things, I thought I couldn't tell anybody. I thought I would lose my job if I spoke my truth. In fact, when you're struggling, it is important to speak your truth. And I think that this is, something that we need to spread awareness about. People should not hide in corners. There is a lot of stigma associated with mental health struggles. And I don't think that that's a good thing. People should be willing to seek help when they need it and not think that they need to hide in corners.
So, Ms. Allen, today let's talk about why psychiatry often fails to give informed consent. So,
Yeah.
tell us, you're a Stanford educated attorney who specializes in medical malpractice and disability law. What does true informed consent in psychiatry actually look like? Not a legal definition, but a real conversation between a doctor and a patient.
Okay. Well, the warning is 2 to 4 weeks, or you may become physically dependent. I firmly believe that you should trust a trusted physician to tell you whether you will become physically dependent. Because, I had no idea. I trusted my physician of 25 years to tell me the risks. And she failed to do so. She told me that, high dose benzodiazepines were no issue, no problem. And I was, up to, 5 milligrams of Ativan, which is a very high dose of benzodiazepines. I think that doctors should have an open conversation with you. Say to you, what's going on? Would you like to be medicated? Here is what will happen to you if you are medicated. Here are the risks. You may well become physically dependent. Will you become physically dependent? It depends. There are some people who don't. There's some people who can take psychiatric medications for a short period of time and they're fine. There are some people who can get off very quickly. But I find it very distressing that most mainstream psychiatrists have 15-minute appointments and prescribe pills because that is the easy and the cheap solution. I firmly believe that Big Pharma is behind this. That Big Pharma, which, makes pills cheap. This is the cheap solution to psychiatric problems.
So, why does psychiatry so often fail to give informed consent compared to other medical specialties? Is it complexity of the brain, the stigma of mental illness, or something else entirely?
Well, I think that there is increasing awareness that informed consent is required, but I think it takes time. It takes a long time to sit down with a client, especially somebody, who might be struggling with mental health issues, and explain to them exactly the risk. It takes more than 15 minutes sit down time to do that. And most psychiatrists are not given the more than 15 minutes in which to speak to a client.
Well said, Ms. Allen. And as an attorney, what would you say is the most legally vulnerable moment in psychiatry's prescribing process? The place where malpractice suit would most likely succeed.
Well, I think most suits are not successful absent seizures or death. Um, I am actually looking at filing a malpractice suit for lack of informed consent. I can do that as an attorney, and I can go pro se, which means that I am representing myself. This is not something that most people can do. I've tried to get counsel and I have been unable to do so because most attorneys do not want to take cases about informed consent. Um, Cases against psychiatrists are very rarely pursued. It is not something that is often litigated. And I think that that is wrong. You know, Psychiatrists should be held accountable just like any other physician because many psychiatrists think they are immune from suit.
Well said, Ms. Allen. You say patients are often not told about withdrawal effects or alternatives. If a
Yeah.
listener is about to start a psychiatric medication today, what are three specific questions they ask their doctor before
Well,
swallowing the first pill?
right. No, before swallowing the pill, that's the key. They ask about the warnings. What will happen to me if I swallow that pill? Is there going to be effects? Is there something that's going, is there another option? You know, have a sit down. Make sure if your doctor doesn't have the time to have a sit down, then find another doctor who does have a sit down, have time to have a sit down. These are the things that you make certain you have a doctor who has time to listen to you. If you find somebody who does not have time to listen to you, then that's very concerning. Somebody else, you need to find somebody else. Because, doctors are not, doctors need to give you the time and the personal attention. I'm a person, and anybody who is struggling is a person as well. And you need to be treated as a person and not just a prescription pad.
Indeed. So, Miss Ellen, what is the most common misunderstanding about informed consent that doctors themselves believe something they think is legally
Yeah,
sufficient but actually is not?
right. So many times doctors do not think that patients have the intelligence to understand. And they think that doctors think, I believe they think that they're all knowing, that they can make decisions for the patients, that the patients don't have the capability to make decisions for themselves. And I find that exceptionally disturbing. The doctors would not trust patients to have the bandwidth to make decisions. And if a patient is struggling and may not seem capable, then a doctor should bring somebody else in. Should say, "Do you have a friend? Do you have a family member who will sit there with you to make these big decisions before physical dependency sets in?"
Physical dependency. You survived 20 years of disabling
Tardive
tardive
dyskinesia.
dis
Yeah.
yeah.
No, this is a recovery. I found two other people on the planet so far who have survived
Mhm.
disabling tardive dyskinesia. I'm getting a medical case study because I think it's very important to help other people figure out how to resolve disabling tardive dyskinesia. Um, this is I believe there are between 600 and 800,000 people in the world who suffer from disabling tardive dyskinesia. I mean, in the US and millions worldwide. My recovery is highly unusual. This is not something that should be expected. Um, no, and I had no idea. I had no idea what was going on. I hid in silence for 25 years while I was on antipsychotics. I didn't tell anybody but my closest friends what was going on. Um, so these are things that I speak about publicly to warn people to to talk. Um, I mean, I have to ask any questions that you have.
Yes, Miss Allen. So if you could go back to the doctor who first prescribed to that
Yeah.
medication, what would you say to them and legally and personally?
Um, well, I have reported my doctor and I have gone and done an investigation with her because I firmly believe that people should hold their doctors accountable. I did not go to suit with my original prescriber. What I'd like to tell her is, no, you could have said something. You could have warned me. I actually asked if benzodiazepines cause physical dependency, and she said no, no issues. I was put up to high dose benzodiazepines, and I was told no issues, no problems, and I trusted her. I'd like to tell her, no, um, you have hurt me. I trusted you. I trusted you. I had a relationship with you for 25 years. You are my trusted physician. And I have no, I've gone in person to do an investigation, and I have a 1-star review on her webpage because I want to warn people that this particular psychiatrist is not somebody to be trusted, um, because she did not give me the time to talk. She didn't even give me the option of therapy. She didn't encourage me to do therapy for most of the 25 years that I saw her.
So, Miss Ellen, walk me through the moment you realized that medication meant to help you had permanently disabled you. What did that realization feel like?
Well, at first I thought, no, I was getting off antipsychotics, and wow, I could do everything I couldn't do. I miraculously recovered, threw away my leg brace. I wore a leg brace for 20 years. Um, I could barely climb stairs for 20 years, um, which was, um, nobody knew why I was physically disabled. Um, so I asked for years to get off antipsychotics. I thought it might free my brain, and it turned out that it freed my body. It was my miracle recovery. Um, but I didn't realize that withdrawal would follow. I had no clue that I became a complete insomniac on the last night of my bad taper off of clozapine, the antipsychotic I was on. I thought, things were going to be fabulous. I thought I had a miracle recovery, and then withdrawal hit. And I had no clue. I had no clue what was coming. It took me a while to recognize what was going on, because it was, you have no idea. There are strange things that happen, strange feelings. You know, I thought it could be over quickly. I thought, I might be off of benzodiazepines at the end of September. I'm looking at 2 more years to taper off benzodiazepines. Some people can do it quickly. My body is saying no. And you have to listen to your body when you're tapering benzodiazepines because they're probably the most dangerous medication to taper. Um, Possibly opiates, but benzodiazepines are probably the worst, are definitely the worst psychiatric medication to taper.
Miss Ellen, you are now publicly speaking, building a social media platform, and will be featured in a documentary. What is the hardest part
Yes.
of
Well, we're hoping. No,
this?
Bobby, I'm working with Bobby Bailey. A documentary is
Mhm.
a ways off. I do have a publicist, and I am publicly speaking about things that need to be talked about.
So, what part of deciding to go to public with your story, and what made you do it anyway?
So, no, I had always wanted to be public. It was something that had been was my decision, was completely my decision. I did not feel comfortable hiding. I wanted to speak my truth. To me, not having people know what was going on was extraordinarily awkward. Um, I felt like I was lying. I was lying to myself and I was lying to the world. And that was something that was did not align with me.
Many people assume that if a medication causes harm, there must be a lawsuit. Did you sue? If not, why? If
Um,
so,
so I name names on Dr. Claudia Baldessano. I name names across platforms because I have reported her and I did an in-person investigation. I consulted counsel. I did not go to suit. Suit would have meant degradation of my character and the rest of my life in suit. Lawsuits are not pleasant to be part of, especially when they are long term. I have another psychiatrist. details of this are private at this point, but I am filing suit. Um, because I firmly believe that you need to speak up for your rights. And as a medical malpractice attorney whose bar has never been in jeopardy, I speak up when there is something that is not right. I file consumer complaints. If I see something that's not right, I will speak up.
What is the most dangerous withdrawal scenario you have witnessed or heard about from others, and what should have been done differently?
So, many people do not have doctors they trust. I am extraordinarily lucky to have doctors who trust me. I know that if for some reason I tip my jar of Valium, I can go to the ER and I will be trusted and I will not be labeled as an addict. Many people have to lie to their doctors to get off of benzodiazepines, which is, something that I don't think is appropriate. Having to lie to your doctor, that does not sit right. Because many doctors are reluctant to let people off of psychiatric medications because of the possible risks that could happen to them. Um, there are many doctors who will cut people off cold turkey, which means that they take people off within 2 to 4, take people off abruptly from um, psychiatric medications, and people suffer for years. There is more awareness among doctors now about the dangers of benzodiazepines, but in some cases, that means that they will not prescribe them anymore, which is not a good thing. You need to have, if you are physically dependent on benzodiazepines, you need to continue to take them. If I don't take my benzodiazepines, within a few days, I will go to seizures. I have no choice but to take them, or I am at risk of death. So, I take my benzodiazepines. I don't believe that they are needed except as a preventative measure for seizures.
You've been inside the psychiatric system as a patient. What is the practice that completely legal, but in your opinion,
That's the completely
ethically
inside.
in yes, legal, but in your opinion, ethically indefensible?
Ethically, I think that doctors think that they're doing the right thing. They think that they're being beneficent, that they are, doing what's best for the patient, for giving everything they have to the patient. When in reality, they are, you know, um, making decisions on their behalf. And I don't think that is ethically wise. I think that doctors need to be transparent. Transparency is extraordinarily important to me. Um, that the risks need to be discussed completely. Um, I was not given transparency. Um, I, um, as a child, there were root causes and predispositions. I was bullied. Things happened in my childhood that led to me being put on psychiatric medications. But psychiatric medications were never the answer to my problems.
Many psychiatrists would argue that informed consent is already required and they do provide it. What would you say to
Yeah.
well meaning psychiatrists who believes they are already doing enough?
Well, I think there are more psychiatrists who are giving informed consent now. And, I think there are many psychiatrists who do give informed consent. And if they do, then great. If they are giving informed consent to their clients, then um, that's fine. Um, if they are, and if the person knows what they're getting into, that's fine. If a psychiatrist is giving informed consent, then that's great. And I think that more and more people are giving informed consent because doctors now are more aware of the risks. But many therapists do not know about benzodiazepines. So I think doctors are now more aware than when I became physically dependent, but it is still a risk that is not widely discussed. especially, my orthodontist, no one will admit if they're in psychiatric medication withdrawal in my community.
You are building a large social media platform discussing this issue. What is the most common message you receive from followers? What is the one that
Well,
hurts
firstly,
you?
people ask if I'm an addict, and I am not an addict. I have never misused a substance. I have never smoked a cigarette. I have never been drunk. I have never done illegal drugs. And yet I am in benzodiazepine withdrawal. People say, "No, you must have known." And no, I had no idea. I'm an attorney, and many people across platforms did not know. Um, people question whether I'm an attorney. It's like, yes, you can look at my credentials. I'm an attorney. My bar has never been in jeopardy. Um, no, there's crazy comments. I ignore the crazy ones. I try to answer as many of them as I can. But there are many people who are suffering. And I'm creating a charity because almost everything I've spent this year is unreimbursable medical expenses because almost nothing is covered for psychiatric medication withdrawal. So I'm creating a charity whereby people will be provided um, life coaches for $150 an hour, um, twice a month, subsidized because people do not have the resources to safely taper off of psychiatric medications. And if you wish to do it, it needs to be done safely and methodically.
Well said, Ms. Allen. And to wrap up our discussion for today, if a listener is currently taking a psychiatric medication and is afraid to ask questions because they don't want to seem difficult or non-compliant, what is the smallest, safest first step they can take to start advocating for their own informed consent?
Well, firstly, you're not being difficult by asking questions. Asking questions is not something that it makes you a difficult person. It's something that is what you do. You ask questions. If a doctor is reluctant to give you answers, then go to a different person. If you don't feel comfortable speaking with your doctor, bring a friend in, bring a family member. You shouldn't be afraid to say, no, I'm not certain that this is what I would like to do.
Well said, Ms. Allen. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your projects or anything you want to promote on Abstract Essay?
Sure, thank you. So, I post public on 6 platforms. I do, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I currently do lives weekly on LinkedIn, and I do them twice a week on TikTok usually. I have a website, ellenlubensky.com. I am publicly speaking about things that, very few people publicly speak about as an attorney. You are welcome to, private message me on any platform, and I am happy to, connect and give whatever support that I can. Um, but I don't give medical advice and I don't give legal advice, but I wish to spread awareness.
Spread awareness indeed. And thank you for doing that, Miss Allen. And before I
Thank
will
you so
let you
much.
go, I have one more
Sure.
question. And why is patient autonomy is important in mental health care specifically?
Well, you have to be autonomous. You have to speak your piece. Many people think that they shouldn't be talking out. They shouldn't be questioning a provider. Um, if you think that you're mentally ill, you think, oh, the doctor has to be right. The doctor is the one who knows everything. And that's doctors do have medical knowledge, and you have to figure out who you're going to trust, but you can't be blindly trusting anybody. And I no longer blindly trust any physician. I ask questions of all for any medical procedure.
Well, Miss Allen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it.
Montcalm people, see you soon.